All right, welcome back. Thank you very much. You all know Colleen, and she'll introduce our newest staff addition.
Thank you, everyone. So in January of 2018, Student Affairs submitted a grant application to the Department of Justice Victims of Crime Act. And what that grant was about is identifying service gaps. And one of the things that we've recognized is that we have a gap in service to our faculty, staff, and students who are victims of a crime related to sexual violence, dating violence, stalking, and domestic violence. So we wrote the grant. It's in partnership with Shelter from the Storm. We received the grant, so that was a great accomplishment. And the grant calls for this partnership with Shelter from the Storm, where we can have a privileged campus advocate on our EOU campus. And I'm pleased to introduce to you our privileged campus advocate, and she's going to explain to you what a privileged campus advocate is and how it plays into reporting of sexual violence. So I'm very pleased to introduce our privileged campus advocate, Tiana Mushashik, from Shelter from the Storm.
Hi, thank you. My name is Tiana Mushashik. I just graduated in June from the Sociology and Anthropology program here, so I never really left. I'm still here. And so I did my practicum with Shelter from the Storm and got hired on right after. And so I'm really glad to be here and excited to work here on campus. Where do I? And so for those of you who don't know, Shelter from the Storm is a nonprofit organization that works and provides advocacy and support for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. So my role as a privileged campus advocate is to provide the advocacy and support here on campus at EOU to all students, staff, and faculty. I'm 100% free and confidential. And so the Oregon Advocate Privilege Law, which was passed in 2015, gives me the same sort of privilege that you'd typically have with like your doctor or a lawyer. And those available services that I have include crisis intervention and support services, a 24-hour hotline, Title IX support and assistance, community referrals, legal representation. There's so much that we can do for you. And typically what that looks like is you'd come in and see me. We'd do an initial intake, we'd gather information, and then I'd give you what your options are, and then we'd go from there, and I'd work to give you that support and assistance throughout the whole process. And lastly, I just have my contact information. I'm in Zabel 113, right next to the testing center and ROTC. My office hours are 8 to 4 Monday through Thursday, and Fridays 9 to 2:30. You don't need an appointment, and you could just walk in and come see me anytime. And again, I'm just really excited to be here on campus and excited to be, a resource for the EOU community. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiana. I'm looking forward to working with you. That's great. And I do want to commend Colleen for pioneering this grant that pays for this privileged campus advocate. And I would like you to give her a hand and really acknowledge her hard work in that. She's done a great job. Thank you. So the next session and the last one is a refresher of sexual harassment prevention and response training. It's a refresher. Refresher is Latin for going faster than usual through familiar content. So some of these slides you've seen last year. The cases are new, but you'll recognize a lot of the material. There haven't been any substantial changes in the laws in the last year, so if you understood it last year, then you'll understand it this year. So, most fundamentally, why do we do this every year? Well, yes, it's certainly required, but it's most important because sexual harassment and its effects impede the education of students, which is EOU's goals or mission, of course. So this is why it's so important. It's just very harmful, and it impedes education, which is what we're all about. It also violates our values and principles, in particular our altruism and integrity. I'm finding that these values are coming into play more and more as we work together and understand how to collaborate more effectively and work together toward the welfare of students. And sexual harassment, or any kind of harassment for that matter, really goes against these two values, and we are to avoid it. Today, Colleen and I will be taking you through a series of just educating you on what the laws are and running you through a few cases, and then briefly at the end, revisiting the responsible person obligations.
Yeah, so we're going to identify or talk about the civil rights laws. We're going to review a few of those. We're going to define sexual harassment, and we're going to talk about some case studies that are quite interesting, and we want to be able to recognize and respond to prohibited harassment here at EOU.
So let's look at the laws and the policies. So this year we're expanding, as you know, the legacy policy project that the Policy Coordinating Committee undertook this last year was largely pretty darn successful of digesting hundreds of OAR, former OARs into EOU policies, and in particular, Chapter 6, which affects the whole campus, everyone on campus. There are certain policies we want to familiarize you with, 6.05, 10, 15, and 20. And then we also this year included, well, I guess we did last year, the Oregon Education Law, and of course, Title 6 and 7 of the Civil Rights, and Title 9 of the Education Amendment Act. The federal laws, briefly, Title 6 prevents discrimination, race, color, national origin. Title 7, it's a big one. It's very comprehensive in that it prevents all this protected class discrimination in employment. And since we're all employees, we get to understand and abide by that one. The Rehabilitation Act, of course, prevents discrimination and anything regarding disability. And Title IX, another huge one, prohibits discrimination on sex in education and education employment.
So the Oregon Education Civil Rights Act prohibits any act that unreasonably differentiates treatment. And what we really want to focus on is the intended or unintended, or any act that is fair in form but discriminatory in operation. So the key that we're wanting to focus on is whether or not whether it's intended or unintended. That's the key when we look at what the situation might be when we investigate and look into what is being brought forward.
Recall that there are three types of prohibited sex discrimination. This is specifically with sex discrimination. One is the intentional decisions that say, I'm going to treat you differently because you're different than I am, or because you're the same, anything regarding sex or a sexual nature. Number two is disparate impact, which Dr. Drew was talking about some of her perspectives and understanding of the subtle ways that disparate impact creeps into normal practices and activities. Nevertheless, it's just as illegal. And then number three, which often is invisible to the perpetrator, is retaliation. It seems justified. It seems like you have another motive. But if you step back, you realize that it actually is retaliation based on something that happened or the condition of a person that has nothing to do with education or nothing to do with employment. Be aware of these and do step in to correct them or report them, and we'll go through those cases in a moment. So just a few tips on how do you know if something's unwelcome, because part of the deal is that your behavior is unwelcome to the other person. There are two standards. This is certainly a key one. Would you want your behavior to appear in the evening news? Do we have an evening news here? I don't think we had. Portland does. Evening news in Portland. Is there a difference in status or power? This is a big one because some of the power differentials are quite subtle. You may not think that just because this student isn't in your class, or this employee works on some other division across campus, there's still likely a power differential there. Would you behave if a trusted family member were standing next to you? Or would you want someone else to act this way toward people that you love? Or most fundamentally, did the person ask for your help and advice? Is there, some people don't think there's such a thing as constructive criticism. It's either criticism or it's constructive. And unasked for advice is criticism. So develop the relationship. If you have something to say to people, acknowledge them and understand them as who they are before you start hammering out advice, because it probably will be unwelcome. Okay, case number 1. Go ahead and read through that about Iris. Happy hour, Mr. Date at happy hour. Gosh, can't imagine that. Here are your options. Make sure justice is served. Find out who her boss was and send him a little note. Okay. Teach Iris a lesson about being grown up. Tell her not to bring her personal problems to work. Remind Iris that EOU has an EAP program, a good one. Or contact the Title VII officer, which happens to be me. Of course, you want the bottom two. You don't want to be taking justice into your own hands. It's usually another injustice when you do so. Teaching other people about how to live their lives often results in personal harm. Go ahead.
Okay, so we have a second case. If you want to go ahead and read that. All right, so some of your options are make sure justice is served, again, spread the word that Neelan is a predator, teach Neelan a lesson about being responsible, file a false rape report to the cops, do nothing, this really isn't any of your business, or contact the Title IX coordinator, which happens to be me, and report the situation so it can be investigated. So obviously the answer is contact the Title IX coordinator so that we can investigate the matter. Okay.
And number 1 is certainly tempting,
Yes.
but it's rarely productive or constructive. All right, number 3. Let's talk about Quincy for a minute. Okay, so you have a person who likes to teach students lessons. Here are your options. Make sure justice is served. Tell everyone at the next department meeting that Quincy is a controlling person. Show them a picture of just how big they are. Teach Neelan a lesson about being a controlling person. Actually, that should say Quincy about being a controlling person. Put a fake vomit in his office chair. That's one of my favorite tactics when I was 15, but I've outgrown that one. Contact the Title IX coordinator, the Title VII officer, or do nothing. This really isn't your problem. Of course, you can get the idea here. The theme is to report the problem so that the processes of proper investigation and determination can happen. If Colleen and I don't know these things are happening, then it probably won't happen.
Yeah, and I just want to commend everyone. Unofficially at this point, the numbers aren't totally in, but our Cleary report indicates that we had 24 reports of discrimination that came in or harassment that were investigated and potentially adjudicated if necessary. So commend all of you for making that step to come forward, because that's the work that we do, and we can't change things if we don't know that there's a problem. So thank you, commend all of you for that. The policy prohibiting illegal discrimination affecting students and the policy prohibiting sexual harassment, you'll notice they have new numbers, as Chris had mentioned. But EOU's policy prohibiting illegal discrimination is identified here under 2C, sexual harassment. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and read that. Simple and to the point, correct? Easy to do? Not always. There's blurred lines that can occur when you're not sure about things. So we have the policy, of course. Policy also defines other prohibited harassment, specifically discrimination, other prohibited harassment. Did you pass the slide? No, we're missing one. Well, we wanted to, maybe it's the next one. Can you go one more over?
I stuck in the consensual.
Okay.
I can mention this one.
That's fine.
There's a lot of great romances on this campus. Don't want to inhibit those. True love is true love. I'm not going to get in the way or be a judge of that. But there are prohibited relationships when it violates the consensual relationship policy. You can read these, but basically if there's a power differential, again, sometimes very subtle, you're not allowed to have any kind of romantic or sexual relationship with the other person.
And also to include, to add, is that if you find yourself in a consensual relationship, and if there is potentially a power differential, you are to report to your supervisor about that.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, now you go.
All right, now here's where I was going. The other prohibited harassment, if you want to go ahead and read that for a moment, we have that also here for you. One of the things that we really wanted to highlight is the disability harassment, and Chris is going to talk to you about that.
So often when we associate, hear the word disability, we have a classic person in a wheelchair or some sort of a permanent disability that we can see. It's a physical disability. Of course, this isn't the case. Tremendous amount of people, both students and adults, fight disability of the emotional and mental areas. For instance, this slide indicates the number of students, college-age students who fight with depression, feelings of being overwhelmed and exhausted. I can't imagine that in college. These things do happen, of course, and just because we don't see them doesn't mean they're not there. So this slide is nothing except a slide about being aware of what you're doing and whose life are you trying to improve, with what advice are you giving. It could be well-intentioned, but it could also be completely destructive or not helpful at the least. So just be aware of these both visible and invisible disabilities. Case. Okay, you saw some son of a gun parking a handicap. Bill, what's the fine for this? $100 down the rat hole if you park here. All right, so what are the options? You just saw somebody, make sure justice is served, follow them into this hall and give them a lecture, teach this person a lesson about being considerate of others, put a note on their on their windshield. Or, of course, contact campus security. All right.
And if I can just make a comment on this slide as well. We just talked about unseen disabilities. So it might be that the person does have a disability, but it's not visible. So being careful as to how we perceive when someone is there. Even without a handicap sticker, they might have forgot it, but still contacting campus security is the appropriate thing to do.
Bill, how long will it take you to get over to Loso Hall and ticket that car?
Not very long.
Very good.
All right, we have another case. Harry.
All right, so we have limping Viviana. What are your options here?
Making sure justice is served, teach this professor a lesson about being considerate to others, or conclude that this might be a case of disability discrimination and report it to student relations. That's also me.
So the question often comes up, when do students need to have, when is it mandated that you provide accommodations for them? Colleen?
Yes, it's mandated once you hear from disability services. So if you have a student that's saying that I'm disabled, or I need extra time, or I need something, and you have not been contacted by disability services, you need to refer that student to disability services rather than make the accommodation, because once you make the accommodation, it's perceived that there's a disability, and we have to continue doing so even though there might not be documentation to warrant accommodation. So make sure that you get information from disability services before you make the accommodation.
Oops.
Oh,
Okay.
you gave them the answer.
These were, did I skip one?
I don't know. I didn't see it. You sure did.
Okay, you guys didn't see that answer, all right. This is a really tough one now.
Did you go back one more?
Go back one more?
Yeah, I think you got kind of crazy. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, wow. Geez. Give a man a remote, that's what happens.
It's not a television set. Okay, so we're going to talk about what you should do about harassment. There are some steps to prevent harassment, and we have them here. Be alert, advise others, step in, report harassment, and again, you've done a great job with that in the increase in our numbers of reports, and cooperate in an investigation. It's really critical. We do take it very seriously, and confidentiality and retaliation are discussed at the onset of the investigation, and we really stress that strongly and really work to make it as comfortable and confidential as possible.
Often there's a question of whether you were just completely insulted or whether it's harassment by somebody's actions, or you viewing another activity, or somebody saying something to another person that you weren't party of, and you would consider that, oh my gosh, that is harassment, and I'm going to report this. Now, we encourage you to report that because often it is. At the same time, sometimes it is not. The fact that somebody was rude, or that you saw something that another person didn't feel or think was harassment can be non-harassment. So there are a couple of standards. One, it has to be unwelcome, and then the second standard is it reasonable to a regular old person? So, but I don't want to discourage you from reporting these incidents, but don't expect that the outcome every time is going to be a conclusion of harassment. Sometimes people are rude, sometimes they are insulting, and if you don't believe me, you can just go to the nearest urban area. Okay.
All right, now we're on to the quiz.
Okay, you didn't see this question earlier. Does Does it have to happen more than once to be considered harassment? No, very good. Excellent. No, one incident can certainly be considered harassment. The second one, consensual sexual relationship between two people can never be deemed sexual harassment. False.
Very good.
Right. And this was akin to the situation I described earlier. Are these advances welcome? There's a lot of pressure to conform to having a sexual or romantic relationship from another person, especially when that person is in power. So just because it looks like somebody's going along with it or isn't telling the person no, that doesn't mean it's not harassment. Not the case. Okay. If you believe you've been sexually harassed, you have to personally confront the harasser and tell them to stop. No, that's not true either. You don't have to personally confront and take skills in dealing with unreasonable harassing people. Just report it. Lastly, what happens if you make a very funny joke or a pun? Everybody's laughing. Is that harassment? Is it a hostile work environment? Well, it can or can't be. We're not sure. Again, the two standards are what is the impact on the victim? Is it welcome or unwelcome? And a reasonable person objective standard. So if somebody comes to me and said, oh, somebody told a joke about a tricycle, some guy with a broken leg on a tricycle, that is really, really, really inappropriate. Well, I'm going to go look. I'm not going to be judging these things per se. I'm going to go find out whether it was welcome and whether or not a reasonable person would consider that as harassment, as a hostile environment.
So we want to share with you what we do, our practice of moving forward when a complaint comes in. It's my responsibility as a Title IX coordinator to make sure that it's a prompt and thorough investigation, that there is, again, I spoke about retaliation, that there's no retaliation against the victim, reporting party, or witnesses, and then protect the confidentiality of everyone involved to the extent possible, because if there's an incident that occurs and it meets a threshold, say there's a weapon involved, I can't hold confidentiality because our institution is at risk. There's a potential risk of harm, and so we have to act on those reports that come in. So, but not majority of the time we do work with the victim and help them through the process and do what it is that they're seeking assistance with. But we take immediate measures, whatever is necessary to make our campus safe for both student or for all involved, faculty, staff, and students.
There's another situation where a person can request confidentiality, but it's not going to remain confidential because we've had 2 or more
Yes.
other reports going
Yes,
on,
thank you.
other data points come in, and now we have three incidents where the university has to take and
Exactly.
initiate an investigation into that.
Thank you for bringing that up,
yeah.
Chris, because that's really important, and that's part of the reason for reporting, and that's part of the reason when we're talking about being a responsible employee, is because we don't know what we don't know. And so in order for us to be able to do the work that we do, we need that information. It's not about getting people in trouble. It's more about keeping our campus safe and in a protecting environment.
There are also some situations where you will report something and whether you saw it or you experienced it, and it doesn't seem like much, but it may have certain characteristics that warrant an investigation because those are actually serious infractions. You may not understand that, but from a institutional protecting students and protecting people, we need to take action on that as well. Those are rare, but it can also happen. So where can you get help, Colleen?
As you know, we have the if you've experienced and identify a variety of issues. All of these are every one of our restrooms, there are 80 of them, has one of these. And we are updating this as we speak to include our Privileged Campus Advocate contact information. That will be added. And we are working on having it translated and printed in Spanish. So that will be helpful. In addition to this document being in all of the restrooms, Shelter from the Storm will also be having additional flyer. So there's going to be lots more information in the restrooms for people that need assistance. So that's one place.
This may seem obvious, but when you're impacted, your emotions are heavily impacted, and you often can't make clear decisions, or you can't remember information. This is why it's everywhere. You're traumatized, or a person you know that was impacted is traumatized. This is the type of setup and information availability that needs to happen.
So another thing that we have, and I pass these out to y'all today, is a brochure on sexual violence, relationship violence, and stalking. One of the federal mandates that we have in place is that every victim that comes in must receive this document, must receive the information about where they can file a report. So every person that comes in does get this. In the center of the trifold, it does have contact information of both privileged or confidential information. So that includes our counseling center, our student health center, and our Privileged Campus Advocate, Tiana. And then also Shelter from the Storm is obviously privileged. But there are non-confidential there's non-confidential information in there, and that's me. Or Chris. Chris isn't on here in that capacity, but definitely he's available to assist. And then there's rights and responsibilities that the victims have, and so we need to make sure that they're aware of this. So this is just for you to have in the event something comes up for you personally, or you're helping someone else out. You at least know that there's an avenue for you to seek assistance.
Now, sometimes I can't imagine, you might forget about which is Title VII or Title IX or Title VI or EOU policy or just common sense. And you're not sure whether to go to Colleen or me or Tiana or whomever. Come to any one of us. We coordinate our investigations so there isn't replication, and to make sure that we're doing the investigations correctly, because they do vary slightly from one area to the next.
And I do need to acknowledge we have a third Deputy Title IX coordinator. Don't think she's in the room.
Khaki?
Khaki Moorhead. She is the...
Here she is over here.
Woohoo, Khaki, we miss you. But you're doing great work. Yeah. She's on a winning streak. But Khaki works with athletics with regard to any of the Title IX issues that might come up. Doesn't have to be athletic related. If you're comfortable and want to be, and Khaki happens to be there for you, she's also available.
Great.
All right. Sorry, I got a little bit sidetracked. Another thing that can come up is if you decide that you don't want to talk to anybody, but you really need to get the information out, that's okay. We do have 3 avenues for you to utilize anonymously. There's the online anonymous report form that's found on the Title IX website, and so if you go to the Title IX website, it's right at the top. It says Title IX report, something to that effect. Can't remember the title. But we have that location. There's also the paper anonymous forms that are in all of the 80 restrooms across campus. Or you can go to the Student Affairs website and click on the report an incident. It should say an incident, but it says report a incident, and we have this here for you. I will share with you that the first option, the anonymous Title IX website information, is through Google Docs or through the Google system. But the Student Affairs website here, this information is there's absolutely no way for me to know who submitted the information unless you put that information in. This is done through our student conduct software program, and it's 100% anonymous. I have no idea where it comes from. Okay? Yes. As a responsible employee, as long as you give me all of the information that you have, and it's submitted in whatever fashion, I believe that that would accommodate the responsible employee information. But you need to provide everything that you know. If there are names, if there's location, everything that the student tells you. And we'll talk about that more here shortly. Okay? Other questions about the website and where you can report and how to report? Don't see any. Okay. Well, then moving on, perfect timing. We're going to go to responsible employee. Under Title IX, Eastern Oregon University has included everybody here on campus. We're all responsible employees. So a responsible employee includes any person who has the authority to take action to redress the harm. It has been given the duty to report harassment or other types of misconduct to the appropriate officials, or is someone a student could reasonably believe has this authority or responsibility. So that's why we have determined that it's everyone's responsibility to be a responsible employee. A student can go to a custodian, a student could go to food service, a student could go to a fellow student, a student could go to their RA, or an employee. It doesn't matter. So that's the importance of knowing why we have determined that everyone here at EOU is a responsible employee. How's that sound? So when you work with students or faculty and staff that are reporting to you as a responsible person, one of the things that happens a lot of times is that you don't know what you should be doing. You know you need to be doing something, but you're not sure what it is. You want to be respectful and listen, but you're also thinking in the back of your mind, what do I do? What do I do? And the biggest thing is to, you assume the role of a responsible employee. You notice what is going on as a person who is responsible, so paying attention to your surroundings. Here we say determine if the incident is a problem and must be reported, perhaps even an emergency. So remember, however, that confidentially is an invalid reason for not reporting. So if you're a student or somebody that reports to you says, I need to tell you something, but this is confidential. I need it to stay confidential. You cannot do that. You need to let them know that whatever information they share with you has to be reported to the Title IX officer. Okay? So here's some steps that you can take. First off, you want to acknowledge the individual. You want to listen. But as soon as you start to hear information, the less information you know, the better, right? Because then you're more obligated to share. And one of the things that you want, it's typical, we like to know more. We want to ask more questions. We want to know what happened. We want to be able to help the individual. But we're asking you not to ask those questions. We're asking you to stop the conversation, let them know that you hear what they're saying, but that you are a responsible employee, and anything they share with you will have to be reported to Title IX. If they're okay with that, then you can continue to listen. If not, then you would want to refer them to the Title IX officer or to Tiana as a privileged campus advocate. Okay. So you want to acknowledge the person, as we said. Be aware of the individual's confused emotions. Somebody could be crying profusely and really upset, whereas another person would potentially be laughing or be, I guess, I can't think of the word, but all I can think of is static, where they're just monotone and You can't get anything response from them. So there are a variety of emotions that occur when a victim is working through these difficult things. So don't assume anything because of their behavior. Just know that they need to get to a place where they can be assisted. Okay? So, one of the things that I want to share with you is we have this privileged campus advocate on campus, and many of you might be wondering, well, how is this going to work? We are following a model from Willamette University through their Title IX program, and what we will be doing is if a report comes in to me or Chris or Khaki, it will be reported to Title IX. What we're going to be doing is only asking about safety. Are you safe? Is there anything that we can assist you with at this time for your protection? We're not going to be asking questions about what happened, none of that. We're just asking for safety. Then we're going to refer them to Tiana. Tiana will make that outreach to the individual and help them to identify what are the sources or resources that are available to them for them to get assistance. And then I'll work with her with whatever it is that needs to happen. Now, if a student or a faculty or staff just wants to get it done and wants to move forward and come through, that's fine. They can come directly to me, and we will take care of that and put things in place. So, any confusion on that for you all? Good, I'm glad. Well, we have a moment. I passed out a little responsible employee script and thought maybe you could take a few minutes with a partner next to you and just practice that. It's a little bit hard sometimes, but you know, help the person to see how it can work. You turned it off.
At least run through it one time each.
Yes,
with
thank
your
you.
pair.
I think that's it. We're done. You did a good job. Yeah. Well, it's not as much information either. I'll get better. I'll get better. So nervous my lips were sticking to my teeth.
So these are the same 10 steps?
Yeah.
9 steps as last year?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you said they report it, you're going to go to Tiana, but we're still going to investigate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But we're going to try to help them to get the resources first. She'll share with them what their options are, how they can go about it, and those types of things. So that takes away the step that I usually would have to do. How are we doing on time?
Good. Next year, I want to put a case in or two about responsible persons.
Oh, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, that one slide is a consensual relationship. Chris Burford wanted that in.
I think it's perfect. Perfect. It just was like, that's not the slide I'm on.
Okay, go ahead and flip over to the other person if you haven't already.
Do we have time to ask for if they have any questions?
Okay, about a half a minute. Okay, great. These steps and following this script can be awkward, so do spend some time, especially those of you who are interacting with students a lot or who have earned sort of an air or a reputation for being a confidant. Do practice this script and understand the steps you go through so that you can be the most helpful and get the most resources to the person involved. Great.
Yes.
What's the difference between keeping something private and keeping it confidential? We found that kind of a confusing language. The language says we can keep it private but not confidential.
Right. That means that you're not going to share additional information with others other than the privileged campus advocate or the Title IX coordinator or Title VII.
You don't have to go blabbing it all over the neighborhood, in other words. You can keep that private. But confidential from the university would be improper. Yes. You, go ahead.
Yes, and the reason why that is in there is to determine whether it's a HR issue or whether it's a Title IX issue, but I think what we can do is just say that it doesn't matter which one it is. You don't necessarily have to decide, and we'll change that up because it does appear confusing, and I agree with you. It just is a matter of who do you contact. And if you contact HR and it's a matter that needs to be dealt with through the Title IX, he's going to notify me anyway. So between Title IX, the Privileged Campus Advocate, or the HR office, I think that's where we were going, is to decide the type of issue that it is. But the way we work together, I think, does change that up, Anna. So thank you for bringing that out and sharing that confusion.
It's also a comment on when somebody comes to you, you don't want to pepper them with 20 questions on what happened. There's an emotional listening role for you in that circumstance. It also addresses that as well.